On March 2, 2007, police officers executed a search warrant at 6432 Westfield Boulevard in Washington Township, Michigan. Inside the garage of the suburban home, investigators found a plastic garbage bag containing what would later be identified as the dismembered torso of Tara Lynn Grant. The discovery came 18 days after her husband Stephen had reported her missing, claiming she had left home after an argument and gotten into a dark-colored car. For weeks, Stephen Grant had appeared on television news programs pleading for his wife's safe return. He portrayed himself as a devoted husband and father, desperately searching for answers about Tara's disappearance. He accused police of harassment and suggested they were wasting time investigating him instead of finding the real culprit. His emotional appeals captured public sympathy and media attention across Michigan and beyond. But the evidence found in that garage told a different story entirely. The successful business consultant who had been traveling regularly for work was not missing at all. She was dead, killed by the very man who had been begging for her return on camera. The business trips that Stephen claimed took Tara away from home had become central to his alibi, part of an elaborate deception designed to explain her absence. While he disposed of her remains, what investigators discovered next would reveal the shocking truth about Stephen Grant's double life. Behind the facade of a caring husband lay a man consumed by jealousy and rage, who had murdered his wife in their family home while their young children slept upstairs. The business trips that had seemed so routine, so normal, had been transformed into a sinister cover story for one of Michigan's most brutal domestic homicides. Washington Township, Michigan. In 2007 was the kind of suburban community where successful professionals raised their families in well-maintained homes with manicured lawns. Located in Macomb County, about 30 miles north of Detroit, the area attracted dual-career couples who valued good schools and safe neighborhoods for their children. Tara Lynn Grant embodied the American dream of professional success and family stability. Born on June 28, 1972. She had built a thriving career as a consultant with Washington Group International, a global engineering and construction company. Her work required frequent travel, taking her to project sites across the country where she provided expertise on complex industrial projects. At 34, she was recognized as a rising star in her field, earning substantial income that helped support her family's comfortable lifestyle. Stephen Grant presented himself as a devoted stay-at-home father, caring for the couple's two young children while Tara traveled for business. 7-year-old Lindsay and 3-year-old Ian knew their mother's work took her away regularly, but they could count on their father to maintain routines and household stability. To neighbors and acquaintances, the Grants appeared to have found the perfect balance between career success and family life, with Stephen's flexibility allowing Tara to pursue her professional ambitions while ensuring their children received attentive care. The evening of February 9, 2007 began like countless others in the Grant household. Tara had returned from a business trip to Puerto Rico the previous day and was preparing for another departure scheduled for the following week. Stephen was at home with their children, following the established routine that had defined their marriage for years. According to Stephen's later confession, an argument erupted between the couple that Friday night. The dispute centered on Stephen's discovery of Tara's affair with a colleague, a relationship that had developed during her frequent business travels. The confrontation escalated rapidly, with accusations and recriminations filling the house while their children slept in bedrooms. Upstairs, at approximately 10:30 p.m., Stephen strangled his wife to death in their home. The attack occurred in their living area, where Tara collapsed and died from asphyxiation. Stephen then faced the immediate problem of what to do with her body and how to explain her disappearance to their children, her employer, and the broader community that knew them. Stephen spent the weekend disposing of evidence and preparing his cover story. He loaded Tara's body into their vehicle and drove to his father's tool shop in nearby Roseville. using power tools available. At the facility, he dismembered his wife's remains, separating her torso from her limbs and head. He wrapped the body parts in plastic bags and tarps, then transported them to various disposal sites. The torso was temporarily buried at Stony Creek Metropark, a public recreation area about 20 miles from their home. Stephen believed the remote location would prevent discovery, but paranoia about park maintenance workers or visitors led him to return days later and retrieve the remains. He moved the torso to his garage, hiding it among household items where it would remain until police found it weeks later. Other body parts were scattered across multiple locations. Stephen disposed of Tara's limbs and head at different sites, ensuring that even if one location was discovered, investigators would struggle to recover complete remains or establish the full scope of the crime. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, Stephen reported Tara missing to the Macomb County Sheriff's Office. He told deputies that his wife had left the house after an argument, claiming she was getting into a dark-colored vehicle that he couldn't identify. He suggested she might have gone to stay with friends or family members, though he couldn't specify who or where. Stephen's initial police interviews were carefully constructed to deflect suspicion. He portrayed himself as confused and worried about Tara's uncharacteristic behavior. He emphasized her demanding work schedule and suggested that stress of constant travel might have caused her to act impulsively. He provided investigators with names of Tara's colleagues and business contacts, encouraging them to focus their search on her professional connections rather than examining their marriage. The missing person case quickly attracted media attention, partly due to Tara's prominent position in the engineering industry and partly because of Stephen's willingness to appear on television. He granted interviews to local news stations, participated in press conferences, and maintained an active presence on social media platforms where he appealed for information about KOD. About Stephen's media appearances were calculated performances designed to generate public sympathy while establishing his innocence. He appeared emotional during interviews, sometimes breaking down when discussing his children's questions about their mother's absence. He criticized police for what he characterized as excessive focus on him rather than pursuing other leads. During this period, Stephen continued caring for their children, maintaining household routines and projecting normalcy despite the investigation unfolding around him. He enrolled the children in counseling to help them cope with their mother's disappearance, a move that reinforced his image as a caring father dealing with an impossible situation. However, Stephen's behavior raised suspicions among experienced investigators. His demeanor during interviews seemed rehearsed rather than genuinely spontaneous. He provided overly detailed accounts of events leading up to Tara's disappearance, while claiming ignorance about crucial details like the vehicle she allegedly entered. Moreover, Stephen refused to cooperate fully with the investigation. He declined to take polygraph tests administered by police, though he later agreed to testing by a private examiner of his choosing. He hired an attorney early in the process, which was his legal right, but unusual for someone genuinely desperate to find a missing spouse. As February turned into March, Stephen's story began showing inconsistencies that investigators found increasingly troubling. His explanations for various evidence discoveries didn't align with his initial statements. Phone records and financial transactions created timelines that contradicted his version of events. The pressure of maintaining his deception while caring for 2 young children and dealing with media attention began taking its toll. Stephen's public appearances became more erratic, and his criticism of police grew more strident. He accused investigators of harassment and suggested they were incompetent, rhetoric that further damaged his credibility with law enforcement professionals who had decades of experience distinguishing between genuine grief and calculated deception. Detective Sergeant Pamela McLean of the Macomb County Sheriff's Office took lead on the Tara Grant missing person case, bringing 20 years of investigative experience to what initially appeared to be a standard domestic disappearance. McLean had handled dozens of similar cases and understood that statistics heavily favored the spouse as either victim or perpetrator when married. Individuals vanished under mysterious circumstances. McLean's first priority was establishing a timeline. Of Tara's final days, she interviewed colleagues at Washington Group International who confirmed that Tara had returned from Puerto Rico on February 8th and was scheduled for another business trip the following week. Coworkers described Tara as reliable and professional, someone who always informed supervisors about travel changes or personal issues that might affect her work schedule. The investigation revealed concerning patterns in Stephen's behavior immediately. Following Tara's reported disappearance, bank records showed he had withdrawn large amounts of cash in the days after February 9th. Transactions that seemed inconsistent with someone anxiously waiting for a missing spouse to return home. Credit card records indicated purchases of cleaning supplies, plastic tarps, and other items that raised investigators' suspicions. McLean examined the Grant family's phone records and discovered that Stephen had been making numerous calls to Tara's cell phone after reporting her missing, a behavior that seemed genuine until investigators realized the calls were going directly to voicemail without ringing. This suggested Stephen knew Tara's phone was turned off or destroyed, information that contradicted his claims about her spontaneous departure. Physical evidence at the Grant home provided additional red flags for the investigation team. Luminol testing revealed traces of blood in the couple's living room and garage, areas that Stephen claimed Tara had never entered on the night she allegedly left. The blood evidence was minimal but consistent with cleanup efforts, designed to remove obvious signs of violence. Forensic examination of the family's vehicles produced more troubling discoveries. Stephen's pickup truck contained traces of human decomposition in the cargo area, evidence that suggested he had transported biological material recently. Hair and fiber analysis from the truck's interior matched samples taken from Tara's personal belongings, creating a connection between her disappearance and Stephen's vehicle. The investigation took a significant turn when McLean obtained search warrants for the Grant property and Stephen's father's tool shop. The warrants were based on accumulating circumstantial evidence and Stephen's increasingly suspicious behavior during interviews. On March 2, 2007, investigators executed simultaneous searches at both locations. At the tool shop, forensic specialists found evidence of recent cleanup efforts and traces of biological material on power tools that could have been used for dismemberment. Blood evidence and tissue fragments discovered in the shop's drainage system suggested someone had used the facility to process human remains, then attempted to sanitize the area afterward. The breakthrough came at the Grant family home, where investigators methodically searched every room, closet, storage area, and outbuilding. In the garage, beneath bags of rock salt and household items, Detective McLean discovered the plastic garbage bag containing Tara's dismembered torso. The remains showed clear signs of power tool cuts and had been wrapped in materials consistent with those purchased by Stephen the days following Tara's disappearance. The discovery of Tara's remains immediately transformed the case from missing person to homicide. McLean coordinated with the medical examiner's office to establish cause of death and collect forensic evidence that could link Stephen definitively to the crime. Preliminary examination indicated death by strangulation with additional trauma, consistent with dismemberment occurring post-mortem, with concrete evidence of homicide. McLean obtained arrest warrants for Stephen Grant on charges of first-degree murder and mutilation of a body. However, when investigators arrived at the Grant home to execute the arrest, they discovered Stephen had fled with the couple's children. His vehicle was gone, and neighbors reported seeing him leave. Hurriedly earlier that morning, the investigation now became a manhunt spanning multiple states. McLean coordinated with federal authorities and law enforcement agencies across the Midwest to track Stephen's movements and apprehend him before he could harm the children or disappear permanently. cell phone tracking provided investigators with general location data, but Stephen was moving frequently and appeared to be avoiding major highways and populated areas. After a 36-hour search, authorities located Stephen's cell phone signal in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, near Wilderness State Park. The remote location suggested Stephen might be planning to hide in the wilderness or potentially harm himself and the children. Search teams, including K-9 units, helicopters, and ground personnel, were deployed to the area. On March 4, 2007, search teams found Stephen collapsed from hypothermia in a wooded area of the park. He was alone, semi-conscious, and suffering from exposure after spending nearly 2 days in freezing temperatures. The children were located unharmed in his vehicle, parked at the park entrance where Stephen had apparently left them before walking into the wilderness. Stephen was transported to a local hospital for treatment of hypothermia and other medical issues related to his exposure. While recovering, he was formally arrested and charged with first-degree murder, mutilation of a body, and child endangerment. The arrest marked the end of the active manhunt phase, but the beginning of a more complex investigation into the full scope of Stephen's crimes. During his hospitalization, Stephen began making statements to investigators that would eventually become a detailed confession. The combination of physical exhaustion, medical treatment, and psychological stress from maintaining his deception for weeks had apparently broken his resolve to continue denying involvement in Tara's death. The confession Stephen Grant provided from his hospital bed on March 5, 2007, revealed disturbing details that investigators had not anticipated. While the discovery of Tara's remains confirmed Stephen as the perpetrator, his detailed account exposed a level of premeditation and deception that shocked even experienced homicide detectives. Stephen admitted that his wife's business trips had become a source of escalating resentment and suspicion over the preceding months. He had discovered that Tara was having an affair with a colleague during her frequent travels, a relationship that had developed during extended stays at project sites. Rather than confronting the issue through counseling or separation, Stephen had been planning Tara's murder for several weeks before. February 9th, the most shocking revelation concerned the couple's 19-year-old au pair, Verena Dirks, who had been living with the Grant family to help care for their children. Stephen confessed that he had been having an affair with a young German woman, a relationship that had begun months before Tara's murder. The au pair arrangement, which appeared to neighbors as a practical solution for busy parents, had actually facilitated Stephen's infidelity while Tara traveled for business. Stephen's confession revealed that he had manipulated both women's schedules to conduct his affair while maintaining his facade as a devoted husband and father. When Tara was away on business trips, Stephen would engage in sexual relationships with Verena in the family home. Sometimes, while his young children were sleeping upstairs, the arrangement gave him a sense of power and control that fed his growing resentment toward Tara's professional success and independence. Even more disturbing was Stephen's admission that he had used his wife's business travel schedule to plan the timing of her murder. He knew that Tara's frequent absences would provide him with a plausible explanation for her disappearance, allowing him several days or even weeks before anyone would seriously question where she had gone. The business trips that had initially enabled his affair became central to his murder plot. The investigation uncovered evidence that Stephen had been researching disposal methods and developing his cover story for months before the actual crime. Computer forensic analysis revealed internet searches for information about decomposition rates, body disposal techniques, and police investigation procedures. Stephen had been educating himself about how to commit murder and avoid detection, using his wife's business travel as both opportunity and alibi. Perhaps most shocking was the revelation that Stephen had involved his children in his deception. Immediately after the murder, on the morning of February 10th, less than 12 hours after killing Tara, Stephen told 7-year-old Lindsay and 3-year-old Ian that their mother had left for another business trip. He maintained this lie for 5 days, allowing his children to believe their mother was working while her dismembered remains were hidden in their garage. Stephen's confession revealed that he had continued his sexual relationship with the pair even after murdering Tara. Using his wife's supposed business trip as cover for increasingly bold behavior in the family home. Verena later told investigators that Stephen's demeanor had changed dramatically after February 9th, becoming more controlling and possessive while insisting that their relationship remain secret. The investigation also uncovered Stephen's elaborate plans for permanently disposing of Tara's remains. He had researched remote locations across Michigan where he could scatter body parts, ensuring that even if some remains were discovered, investigators would struggle to find enough evidence to prove murder. His decision to retrieve the torso from Stony Creek Metro Park and hide it in his garage was actually a deviation from his original plan. Driven by paranoia about park maintenance crews, forensic analysis of Stephen's computer revealed that he had been documenting his activities through digital photographs, apparently as trophies or insurance against potential blackmail. These images showed various stages of the body disposal process and confirmed details from his confession that investigators might otherwise have questioned. The photographs also revealed the clinical, methodical approach Stephen had taken to dismembering his wife's body. The most disturbing discovery was evidence that Stephen had been planning to kill Verena as well, viewing her as a potential witness who could connect him to Tara's murder. Computer searches found after his arrest included information about making deaths appear accidental and methods for disposing of multiple bodies. Stephen apparently intended to eliminate anyone who might threaten his freedom, including the young woman he had been using for his own gratification. Investigators also learned that Stephen had been stealing money from Tara's business accounts and personal savings to fund his activities after the murder. He had withdrawn thousands of dollars, ostensibly to hire private investigators to find his missing wife. But the money was actually being used to pay for disposal supplies, travel expenses, and other costs related to covering up his crime. The revelation that shocked the community most was learning how completely Stephen had manipulated everyone around him. His emotional television appearances had been carefully rehearsed, performances designed to generate sympathy while deflecting suspicion. His criticism of police investigators was intended to portray them as incompetent while positioning himself as a frustrated victim of their failures. Even Stephen's decision to flee with his children was part of a calculated plan to either escape justice or commit murder-suicide if capture became inevitable. His collapse from hypothermia in Wilderness State Park was not an accident, but the result of a plan to disappear permanently, abandoning his children to die from exposure while he escaped deeper into the wilderness. The prosecution of Stephen Grant presented cute, with overwhelming physical evidence but significant challenges. In securing a first-degree murder conviction, prosecutor Eric Smith faced the task of proving premeditation while navigating Stephen's confession, which admitted to killing Tara but claimed the act occurred during a spontaneous argument rather than as part of a planned murder. Smith's prosecution team focused on the extensive evidence of premeditation revealed through computer forensic analysis and Stephen's methodical disposal of Tara's remains, the internet searches for body disposal methods, the purchase of specific supplies used in the cleanup, and the elaborate cover story Stephen maintained for weeks all pointed to careful planning rather than a crime of passion. The defense, led by attorney Gail Pamukoff, attempted to argue for a second-degree murder conviction by emphasizing Stephen's emotional state and the discovery of Tara's affair as mitigating factors. Pamukoff contended that Stephen had acted in the heat of passion after learning about his wife's infidelity, making the killing manslaughter rather than premeditated murder. However, the prosecution systematically dismantled the defense's arguments. By presenting evidence of Stephen's own affair with the au pair and his extensive planning activities, Smith demonstrated that Stephen's rage was not spontaneous, but had been building for months as he planned both to murder his wife and frame her business travels as an explanation for her disappearance. The trial began in November 2007, with significant media attention due to the brutal nature of the crime and Stephen's dramatic flight from justice. Prosecutors presented forensic evidence linking Stephen to every aspect of the crime, from the murder scene in his home to the dismemberment at his father's tool shop to the disposal sites across. Michigan medical examiner testimony established that Tara had died from manual strangulation, injuries consistent with Stephen's confession, but also indicating the sustained pressure required to kill someone in this manner. The medical evidence supported the prosecution's argument that TC's my Ruby kiss. Ruby kiss, Ruby kiss, Ruby kiss, only Ruby kiss has the luxurious kissed, only Ruby kiss has the luxu, moots, triff. Al squeeze, mani docta. And why said, my lie okay riesk. My medical EVS, my medi malex. You said it, so a lie. We said, my y mas, decivers. By sepsequatami sev, quate dot, we say cute as, go to kicks dies. But it's a maz it, but I commend it aside to cock it sell it's a bika k cupo kickis it's it and use they squi big heads slits hit kitik that I could go these a guy it's to biddy dust is it us to beat it it's but Stephen had deliberately chosen to kill his wife rather than simply losing control during an argument. Digital forensic experts testified about Stephen's computer activities in the months before and after the murder. The evidence showed a clear pattern of research and planning that contradicted any claim of spontaneous action. Stephen had been preparing for months to commit murder and had used his wife's business travel patterns as the foundation for his alibi. The most damaging testimony came from Stephen's own confession, which prosecutors played in its entirety for the jury. His detailed, methodical description of the murder and body disposal revealed someone who had thought carefully about every aspect of the crime. The confession showed no genuine remorse, instead focusing on technical details and self-justification. Verena Dirks de au pair testified about her affair with Stephen and his behavior before and after Tara's murder. Her testimony established Stephen's capacity for deception and manipulation, while undermining his portrayal of himself as a devoted husband driven to violence by his wife's infidelity. The jury learned that Stephen had been conducting his own affair for months while planning to murder Tara. The defense's strategy of arguing for a reduced charge based on emotional distress was further undermined by evidence of Stephen's cold calculation after the murder, his television appearances, his manipulation of his children, and his methodical disposal of evidence showed someone in complete control of his actions rather than someone acting under emotional duress. After 6 days of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on second-degree murder and mutilation of a body. While prosecutors had sought a first-degree murder conviction, the jury apparently accepted some aspects of the defense argument about lack of specific premeditation to kill, though they rejected any claim of justifiable homicide or manslaughter. On February 21, 2008, Judge Diane Drazinski sentenced Stephen Grant to 50 years to life in prison for the murder conviction, and an additional 10 years for mutilation of a body. The sentences would run consecutively, ensuring Stephen would serve a minimum of 60 years before becoming eligible for parole, effectively guaranteeing he would die in prison. The sentencing hearing included victim impact statements from Tara's family members, who described the devastating effect of her murder on their lives and their determination to ensure her children grew up knowing the truth about their mother's death. Tara's sister, Alicia Standerfor, was granted custody of Lindsay and Ian, providing them with stability and love as they process the trauma of losing both parents. The case's resolution brought closure to a community that had been captivated and horrified by the brutal murder and Stephen's elaborate deception. The revelation that business trips, seemingly mundane aspects of professional life, could be transformed into tools for murder and alibis shocked residents and changed how many viewed their neighbors and colleagues. The Stephen Grant case stands as a chilling reminder of how ordinary family routines can mask extraordinary deception and violence. What appeared to be a modern arrangement between successful spouse-sister traveling for business while Stephen managed their household was actually the elaborate murder plot that destroyed multiple lives and left 2 young children orphaned. The investigation revealed that business trips, those routine aspects of professional life that millions of families navigate, had been weaponized by Stephen Grant as both motive and cover story for his wife's murder. Tara's success and independence, which should have been sources of family pride, instead became objects of resentment that ultimately cost her life. Stephen Grant was denied parole in 2021 and remains incarcerated at the Thumb Correctional Facility in Michigan, where he will likely spend the rest of his life. His children, now adults, have built new lives with their aunt and uncle, far from the media attention and notoriety that surrounded their father's crimes. The case raises uncomfortable questions about recognizing danger in domestic relationships and the lengths to which some individuals will go to maintain control over their spouses. Tara's colleagues remember her as a talented professional whose career was cut short by the very person who should have supported her success. Today, when business travel seems routine and technology makes staying connected easier than ever, the Grant case serves as a stark reminder that the greatest danger often comes not from strangers, but from those closest to us who hide their true intentions behind facades of love and devotion.